Now, how many times have you heard a situation or scenario like this? Two people, one says, yes, it is. The other says, no, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And they go back and forth, one thinking they're right and trying to persuade the other thinking they're right and they're trying to persuade the other. Many times we may hear this played out with siblings, especially when you're younger. I have a sister who's 6 years younger than me, and I can remember way back in the day getting into little arguments or disputes very similar to that. And we hear something like that and we say, oh, that sounds so silly. But the same type of scenario many times is played out in our minds. And what I'm talking about is doubt. And so on today's episode, we want to talk about the idea of a healthy understanding of doubt. And so in our minds, one side says this, yes, this is true. The other side says, I'm not sure that that is true. One side says, yes, you can trust God. The other side says, are you sure you can trust Him? One side says, yes, I believe. The other side says, I'm not sure if I can believe. One side says, yes, God is right. The other side says, are you not sure the scientists are not right? One side says, God can do that. And then the other side says, am I sure that God will do that? And so it's almost like the cartoons or the depiction when you've got God on or an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and they're going back and forth, back and forth. And that's kind of the idea of doubt in our minds. And so sometimes we find in our minds that we go back and forth, or really we get stuck right in the middle. And being stuck in the middle is the essence of doubt. Now, James chapter 1 just gives us a few verses as he begins to talk about doubt. Beginning in verse number 5, he says this, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So he begins telling us to, if we want wisdom, to ask God. But then he kind of begins to describe how we're going to ask. He says, if you're going to ask, you need to ask in faith. And he says, nothing wavering. That word wavering there means doubt, nothing doubting. For he that wavereth, he that doubts, is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. And he begins to describe this person who doubts. And so the person whose doubt is described in this verse as a wave. And he begins to reveal how the wind has power over that wave. The wind can push. And I grew up going to a lake, Lake Gaston, and I spent a lot of time there. And when the wind is no wind, it's glass. You can go out and ski. You can go out and have a good time. And when the wind picks up, man, it picks up the waves. And sometimes those waves turn into white caps and they get big. And so the wind has a lot of control over the surface of the water. And it begins to talk about that wind having control over the wave, or really some circumstances having control over the person. And so this wind or this doubt begins to control or drive the thinking and direction of a person. That's what he's saying here. The person that wavers is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. And so this person is thrown back and forth. And that's kind of the idea of doubt. We have faith, then we doubt. We have faith, we doubt, and we go back and forth. Then he kind of clarifies a little bit further in verse number 8 and says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. I imagine you've heard that verse. Double-minded man, what does that mean? It's a person of two minds, that they are thinking two things almost at the same time. And it says this double-minded person, or this person who doubts, is unstable in not some of his ways or some of her ways, but in all of his or her ways. And that unstable means they lack foundation, or they're easily pushed around. So as we think about doubt, we think about faith. We're trying to apply this to our theme or of our podcast, taking your next step. It takes faith really to step out, right? To take our next step. And so as we think about faith, the very essence of faith brings about the possibility of doubt. You see, anyone who believes will experience the power of doubt at some point in some time. I imagine you have, if you're a believer, or if you've believed in anything, honestly, you've had doubts about that belief. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ and you study the Word of God and you have beliefs, convictions, I'm sure there have been times when you have had doubts come in. Maybe you've heard someone challenge that, or you've heard a different view or a different perspective, or maybe you never really thought through that. So until you think through and get an answer, doubts will come into your mind. Have you ever doubted that God exists? I would imagine every Christian would say that at some point. We have those doubts that flood our mind. So doubt is a battle that occurs in our mind, and honestly, it can be seen played out in our lives in many ways. How? By the choices we make, by the faith we exercise, by the steps forward or the steps backwards that maybe we're taking in following Jesus Christ. Os Guinness wrote a great book entitled God in the Dark, where he talks in depth about doubt. He said this: "Of course, faith is much more than the absence of doubt, but to understand doubt is to have a key to a quiet heart and a quiet mind. Anyone who believes anything will automatically know something about doubt, but those who know why they believe are also in a position to discover why they doubt." And so he begins to talk about the benefit, if you will, of us understanding doubt, of us acknowledging doubt. And there's great help there. And so he gives two reasons, as we continue reading down in his book there, why believers should have a full understanding of doubt. The first one is this. He says a healthy understanding of doubt will act as a safeguard against today's widespread and unnecessary breakdown of faith. So he says a healthy understanding of doubt will act as a safeguard against today's widespread and unnecessary breakdown of faith. So in our culture today, it is becoming increasingly secularized. And so with that, there's more pressure and there are more attacks that you and I are feeling and will feel on our faith. There's more people making accusations, challenging, bringing up different areas about God's Word, the authority, the authenticity, about Jesus Christ, just about our faith as a whole, about the teachings of Jesus. So much of that is being challenged. And the more it's challenged, the more pressure you and I feel, and the more doubts can arise. And so you and I must be prepared to defend these attacks, not just as a witness to believers around us, but I think more importantly, to ensure our faith is resting on a solid foundation. And that's what James was talking about. That double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. He goes back and forth, and so he can't be settled. And so he's easily pushed, tossed, whatever the next wind or current, or somebody can bring a very intelligent argument against that belief or that faith, and they're easily swayed because they don't have a foundation. They're not sure and they're not secure in what they are. And so I think that's having a healthy understanding of doubt will help and aid in that. So we need to be sure what we believe and why we believe it, or we'll find ourselves just like that wave that James is talking about. The second reason he gives about a healthy understanding of doubt is this: it helps us to prepare for the years of testing he says, I believe, are to come. You see, our faith is sure to be tested. That's the essence or nature of faith. In order to even find out if you have faith, it almost has to be tested. We can say we have faith, but until it's tested or there's some evidence of that faith, how can we even know that we have faith? And so understanding faith and doubt will help us tremendously when those times of testing come in our life. And so doubt, I believe, is something all believers experience. I believe it is something many times we don't like to talk about, because we say, if we're saying that we doubt, then people would look down upon us, think we're less of a Christian, or think we're backsliding or falling away from our faith. But I think doubt is a very real issue as we consider taking the next step in our faith. I know I experienced doubts, and I've had to settle some of those doubts, and I still have doubts that are trying to come into my mind, and I have to work on those, and I have to settle them. And there's going to continuously be doubts that come into my life. But in order for me to take my next step in my faith and in my walk with Jesus Christ, I'm going to have to approach those doubts. I'm going to have to work through those doubts, and I'm going to have to settle those doubts. I can't just allow doubt to stack upon doubt, just to try to quiet it, put it off in a compartment of my life, because when those challenging circumstances come, if that doubt is there and it's been compounded upon, guess what may happen to my faith? It may tip over and fall. But if I take care of those doubts as they come, then my faith is strengthened. And I think that's the beautiful thing about doubt. Taking care of doubt will really essentially help us to strengthen our faith. And so, doubt in our lives may be one of the greatest hindrances that we as believers experience from being able to take our next step. So, what we want to do over the next few weeks is to begin to examine doubt in a greater way, that we may have a greater understanding of what doubt is, be able to identify doubt, look at practical ways to remove doubt in our lives. We have seen the effects of doubt in college age young people's lives, the statistics, the reality of those we've seen lived out. 52 to 63% of freshmen that will come into college as a believer, by the time they finish 4 years of school, will completely reject their faith. Roughly 64% of 18 to 22-year-olds would drop out of church during that age stage. Why? So many times it's doubts, and it's doubt compounded upon doubt, compounded upon doubt. Answers were never sought, answers were never gained, and that doubt caused a shaky foundation. And when the trials of life, the circumstances, the challenging questions, just the circumstances in our culture and so forth, it puts pressure on our faith, and many times that faith is not stable enough. So we want to have a strong foundation in our faith. So plan to join us and follow along in these upcoming episodes, and I believe it'll be a great help, and I believe it'll help us to take our next step and to be more grounded and strengthened in our faith.